here at ASU.
And I'm Catherine Chen. I'm a strategic intelligence analyst here at ASU.
And we're going to be going over broadly over what is competitive intelligence. So this is the agenda for the next hour or so. And then we're going to use that as an example of like, what is the sponsor analysis? And Catherine and I will be discussing that process and the importance of knowing your audience in producing CI products. And then we should have about 15 minutes for conversation and discussion. The one thing that I would like to point out is that we've built this capacity over 5 or 6 years here at ASU. So when we talk about what is competitive intelligence, it may be a challenge at where you're at your university. If you are if you're seeing this as a function that is like half of your time and you're a single person versus what we're doing here where we actually have a group about it. One thing that I want to have everyone think about when they are viewing this presentation, particularly if it's a first timer, go ahead and like raise your hand if this is the first time you've attended the working group, just so that we have some kind of idea of how many new people we have. And that is a good amount. So that's approaching 20, so 18. So that's great. So again, we're going to be, I'll be reviewing what is competitive intelligence, and then we'll get into the example of the sponsor analysis. So there we go. So I guess if you want to pop into the chat, particularly if you're new, what do you think of when you hear competitive intelligence? And while people pop in the chat, I'll go ahead and get started. If you've seen this presentation before, you maybe have seen this slide before. We actually had a meeting where we actually had this interaction, which was great. So if you think of competitive intelligence, are we hackers? Are we super spies? Do we do interesting visualizations? Unfortunately, we're not quite any of those things. We are office workers or home office workers, as the case may be. But the focus of our work in competitive intelligence or strategic intelligence is similar to a lot of analytical work, where we're looking at the external environment to collect data and organize it into information. But our goal is to really take that next step of deeply analyzing it to create actionable intelligence for our stakeholders. And that's one of our main mantras, is that actionable intelligence. So when we look at it, when I said, are we hackers or spies? Competitive intelligence is really about that ethical collection of data information to inform decision making. And there on the right, you can see the 5 pillars that we follow in our work. Our goals are to be strategic. How does it advance the organization? We want to be unbiased. We're not going in to support an answer or to justify a response. We are looking at the landscape. We're looking at all the information available to make solid recommendations to our leadership or faculty or whichever stakeholders we're producing a product for. Because we're analysts, we want measurable, quantifiable data to inform maybe our qualitative recommendations. But having that data back up is, I think, important to build credibility with stakeholders. And as I said, actionable. We don't want to produce something that's nice to know. We want to put it in a format and phrase our recommendations in ways that our stakeholders can easily implement and add into their process, so that it again advances the organization and advances their goals. And as a CI professional, or as an activity, we want to create repeatable processes that make the process easier to do and make it more effective and more efficient. So again, we have 2.5 FTEs here at ASU on competitive intelligence / strategic intelligence. You may be doing this as a single person within your RD office or wherever you're located at the university. So again, the main thing to keep here is that the principle of that actionable intelligence. What am I giving to the stakeholder that is useful and can advance their goals? As Karen mentioned, competitive intelligence has its roots in the private sector. So whether it's defense contractors or apparel companies or whatever industry, companies are competing for market share. And how do they do that? They do that by understanding what their competitors are doing. What markets are they competing in? How are their products positioned? What are the industries that they are involved in order to produce their products? What does their vendors and supply chains look like? And lastly, what do their customers want? All of those, and I think you can kind of imagine the different data and insights that companies want in order to be effective in the marketplace. So what we've done is kind of look at that approach and how do we adapt that to the research enterprise, and it actually works fairly well. So while we are all at different universities and maybe competitors, here we are sharing information and best practices on how we do our jobs. But our universities are competing in that marketplace of funding opportunities that are faculty who their product is their expertise are applying for those funding opportunities. And their expertise are in different research fields that are, has money available. And how do we find those other assets that support their research in terms of specialized facilities or instrumentation or partners, whether that's internal or external to the university. And lastly, the customers who are the sponsors, right? Who have the money and who our faculty and researchers are applying to. So that's our main, that's how we've kind of grafted the process and the mindset to the work that we are doing. The CI process itself is similar to any kind of project-based work. We have a planning process and we collect information, we analyze it. As I said, getting that analysis into a form that is useful to the stakeholder is critical. So how do we transform that and have the mindset to produce something that is not just something that will be like glanced over, but is in a format that is digestible and implemented into the work they're doing and the decisions that they need to make. So the planning process, the number one step I think is understanding the audience. So how the product looks and the work that you're doing will look different if it's for senior leadership within the research department versus a center lead or a single faculty member, because that audience will determine what the motivation for the project is and what your key questions are in developing the product that they're asking for. And again, this is a general process that can be applied to whatever work you're doing. We'll be going into more detail on a specific product that we produce called sponsor analysis and the value of that. And I think importantly, because we are collecting a lot of information, is how do we manage expectations, both internally on what we think we're able to find, as well as what the stakeholder wants. One of the challenges that we find in a lot of projects is what the stakeholder wants may not always be what they need. So how do we develop those lines of communication to get out what they need and then find the information that we can do the analysis on. Collection process, depending on your background with a topic or a project request, understand it, what's the data you need, and what are the sources you need to collect that data. And we've made ever increasing use of human intelligence and talking to people, because that provides insights that are not available in web searches or award databases or strategic plans, which are all very valuable, which we'll talk about more later. But that human intelligence really provides insights that you can't find anywhere else. So as you're going through this process, it's keeping in mind, what is the key question of what you're responding to. There may be bias in some of your data sources, particularly that human intelligence, whether they are perhaps optimists or cynics, or it's just what their mindset is on how they engage with the topic of your inquiry. And then there will be just limitations of what you can and cannot find. And the most important step of any collection process is when to stop. Because I deal with a lot of data in a lot of the work that I do, so it's easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole and keep going and keep digging and finding more and manipulating it in different ways. We need to stop because we need to get to the analysis portion. And the analysis portion, while it's viewed as the next step, is really iterative with collection. So as you're collecting information, you may need to go back and forth between it and analysis for a period of time. But your goal is to remain objective and keep your key questions in mind. Again, in the work that we do, we're not trying to justify a response from our stakeholder. They're not saying, in the terms of our topic today, a sponsor analysis is this, the question may be, how do we best engage with the sponsor? And you can find ways to do that, but it's also about being honest in your appraisal of kind of likelihood of success and how you think about, again, that key question. As you develop a process and do this more and look at the information, you'll find those patterns and themes that really get to the analytical side and providing that useful intelligence, again, to your stakeholders. And again, we're mindful of the gaps and what are we missing. We're not trying to sugarcoat anything. We're trying to give an honest appraisal of a situation in the products that we do. And again, with experience, you find those methodologies and tools that help you work through this process faster. As I said, I do a fair amount of data. My preferred, so I do a lot of work in Excel and pivot tables and trying to extract and find patterns using that tool. You may have, mind mapping tools and other things that develop networks and connections that may be helpful in the work that you do, but it's being mindful of those tools that, again, can make the process repeatable and easier as you do it more in the future. So then transformation. So we are generally producing products for other people. So how do we take our data analysis that we've done in our head and maybe have notes on and get it in a way that, again, produces those actionable findings for our stakeholders? Because what we're trying to do is take those findings, tailor it to our audience to create a story, both the story that we tell them and the story and information analysis that they can incorporate into the work they're doing to tell a better story. So, where I mentioned this at the beginning, the goal of competitive intelligence, yes, there's a process and there's activities that we do, but I think a big takeaway, particularly if this is your first meeting, and Catherine will go into this in just a bit, is how do we get to something that is useful for our stakeholders and really presenting work that advances the ideas and goals of our clients. With that, I'll hand it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, so now that Keith has walked through some of the, the basic processes of what CI is and how you can begin to do it, we just wanted to take a sec to really explicitly articulate like what we see the value of doing this, what we see as the value of doing this type of work. So we had a presentation, just a few weeks ago to new faculty here at ASU. And in that, we really tried to highlight to them that, by using principles of CI, they could actually be saving themselves time, right? So they're putting in all this time up front to do these processes, but with a goal ultimately of understanding where to submit their proposals and how to write proposals that are competitive for given sponsors. But of course, we do more than just that here. So to talk really broadly about the value add of CI is we really strive to use our CI to help our stakeholders make decisions, right? So that they're making as informed decisions as possible. In the case of those faculty members, it's where to submit or where not to submit, but it can go beyond that, right? So where should the institution as a whole be investing resources, for example? And because of that, we can use CI to really be identifying opportunities that we think our stakeholders should be acting on, as well as weaknesses that, they can perhaps strengthen or actively avoid. And we can also use CI to help our stakeholders actually be planning ahead, right? So to take like a future looking perspective, not just be super responsive to what's happening right now. So this is really, depending on project, we might use CI to be thinking both the short and the long term. And to help inform that, we're really looking to try to help our stakeholders both avoid surprises, things that might be unpleasant, or, that our stakeholders could be actually actively preparing for, right? So to make themselves more competitive in the future, as well as to help our stakeholders mitigate risk. So we do this in a few different ways in that we package a few core products for our stakeholders. Some of the things that we do are not necessarily captured in this graphic, but these are our main things. And they really center around 3 units. So that would be sponsors, competitors, as well as ASU, so our institution. And just as a real brief overview, When we look at sponsors, we do a few different types of analyses. So we do what we call funding landscapes, and that really is looking to see what kind of funding is available in a given area or topic that somebody is interested in here. We also do sponsor analyses, which we're going to talk a whole lot more about today, but those focus on a particular sponsor and trying to understand what they're funding. And we also do program analyses, which do, what they sound like, which is we seek to understand what a given program is funding or interested in funding. We also put together external profiles as needed. So these can be folks of particular interest to somebody here at ASU, but they're actually not at ASU. And these can also be profiles of, say, institutions that ASU is interested in benchmarking itself against. We also look at our competitors, particularly within the framework of competitive landscapes. So seeking to understand what our competitors are doing in a particular area that, that somebody here is interested in. And lastly, we do these internal facing analyses at ASU. So we call these capacity analyses, where somebody is often interested in a particular area or question, and we strive to basically look for everybody here at ASU that can be relevant to that question. So a few months ago, I was asked to do one on water, which is a very, very large subject, and ASU is a very large institution. So it can be non-trivial to pull together all these researchers who perhaps touch a given research area. But that can, of course, inform our stakeholders if they're going to do something like put together a center. So just want to take a second to ask the crowd, what types of CI services or products do you offer? If you maybe don't offer any in particular, what type of products or services do you think your institution should offer? What is there a need for? And go ahead and just pop that in the chat. And we'll take a second there. So I see ad hoc items by Nicole.
I think everybody starts with the ad hoc items. At least that's how we started. Analyses of grants, yeah. And yeah, Alba, of course, you're doing all of it. I think sometimes the ad hoc winds up becoming regular items after a while. Erica, all of the things, of course, yeah. What opportunities should we be applying for based on our strengths? Yeah, that's very good. That's sort of like taking in the capacity analyses and then figuring out, what programs should we be going after? Company profile. So that's more on the corporate engagement side there. Fu-Wei, yeah. There's no reason you couldn't do CI and corporate engagement. And funding landscapes, planning tools. Oh, a lot of great answers, guys.
Yeah, I also see one that says new faculty seem to really need help with the funding landscape, which we see too.
Yeah, definitely something we've done before.
Yeah, I mean, and that ties nicely into the meat of our talk today, which is actually getting into what is a sponsor analysis. So thank you everyone for participating. Definitely feel free to drop more things in if you think of anything else. So I've already mentioned a sponsor analysis is an analysis focused on obviously a given sponsor, right? And what we're really trying to answer is what is a sponsor funding and what does a sponsor want to fund? And the reason that we do these is we get asked about given sponsors by our stakeholders, and those sponsors those stakeholders are really trying to understand where they fit in or not within a particular sponsor of interest to them. So a lot of different types of intelligence can go into these analyses. We're going to talk about these in more detail, but they can be things like what the sponsor has already funded, so historic awards, as well as human intelligence we gather from talking to people. And we're going to get into this in more detail soon. But I do want to take a second to briefly talk about the value add of the sponsor analysis. So these are all the points you saw earlier already, decision-making planning. But in particular, how do they facilitate the sponsor analyses? So it might seem obvious, but the decision-making question here really is, should this faculty member be applying to a particular sponsor or not? Or if our stakeholder is somebody who's not actually a faculty member, maybe somebody in leadership, for example, understanding where to invest those institutional resources to pursue sponsor funding. And as part of that, the opportunities and weaknesses that these sponsor analyses can highlight can really be understanding where the institution is particularly competitive and should put, might have a good shot. Or perhaps where they're competitive, but they're not actually applying right now, right? So are those missed opportunities? And we also seek to make sure that our sponsor analyses are really answering the planning question and the risk mitigation points. So we strive to help our stakeholders understand how they should really be positioning themselves for future success, right? So either right now or in the future with this particular sponsor they're interested in. So in terms of thinking about the sponsor analysis process, this is a process that follows that basic CI process that Keith has already laid out. But we're going to highlight a few points to keep in mind as you move through a sponsor analysis in particular. So you start off with planning, right? So we're actually going to revisit this understand the audience point and talk about specifically how to tailor these analyses to a given audience. But suffice to say, it's really important to keep that in mind throughout this entire sponsor analysis process. Motivation, questions, and expectations are all basically what Keith has already laid out. Your key question is, might vary slightly, but it's probably something like, how does this sponsor fit with my faculty members' interests or the direction in which leadership wants to move, for example? And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Keith to talk a little bit more about the rest of the process.
Thanks, Catherine. So the first step, I think, with a sponsor analysis in terms of data collection, it kind of depends on the organization, but it's understanding the organization itself and the organizational structure. With big federal agencies, we may know how National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health are structured, and there may be general knowledge of that. But there may be other departments that are not as well known. There may be philanthropic organizations or other entities that are not well known. So starting with the organizational structure helps you identify where the sources of, what are the actual funding parts of a unit. So ASU in particular is not a land-grant institute. So we had a question about U.S. Department of Agriculture. So we do not do a lot of research with USDA, but and that means there's not as much institutional knowledge about it. So as part of the sponsor analysis, it's really laying out the 4 areas within USDA that are most likely to provide grant funding, and really understanding those entities so that we're not focused on the rest of the organization. Even something like National Science Foundation, which all it does is provide grants, it's still understanding what each of the different divisions do and what their programmatic work is like. So there's still value in understanding the organizational structure. And as somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, with new faculty are not aware necessarily of how federal agencies and departments are structured. So being able to provide that background can be useful. When we're building out a plan, specifically more often for leadership maybe than faculty, but looking at what the strategic priorities of the department are, or the institution is important. A very high level view is strategic plans that most federal agencies do produce on a 5-year cycle. And again, other grant making bodies or other organizations that you're interested in may have strategic plans or some other documentation that really get the high level of, and how do we align with that? And sometimes there are products like NSF's 10 Big Ideas, which are, yes, incorporated in the strategic plan, but deserve a special call out, where we have encountered faculty who have no idea that this has been a big deal over the last 5-6 years. And it's not critical necessarily for any NSF grant to incorporate concepts of the 10 Big Ideas, but it certainly is helpful. And being able to disseminate that knowledge and that understanding of the sponsor increases competitiveness for awards. And then the other part of understanding the organization is how does the money flow? As I said, in that first part of organizational structure, where who actually provides the money, but how is it coming? So whether it's past award history, budget documentation, budget requests, which may mention new programs and new areas of interest of the sponsor, that allows that forward planning in the next year and the next 2 years for how to position, whether it's the faculty member or leadership, with that sponsor. So, in that data collection, in that information collection, it's kind of talked about those first 3 of the structure, priorities, and the money flow. It's also important to understand your home institution, what's been your success or experience with that, and getting some of that human intelligence feedback in your institution for what it's like to interact with that sponsor. And that's where it all kind of ties together with that human intelligence, which can underpin any 4 of these. So the home institution would also be like the award history. And all of this gives an idea to really get deeper into that analytical portion of the sponsor analysis. And again, within a data collection, know when to stop so that you can get to the analysis. So in that iteration, remaining objective and key questions, that's all about kind of remaining on target with what your goal is. And I think this is easier to do with a sponsor analysis because it's generally a bigger question, and anything that you're finding really leads into your analysis. But when you're identifying those patterns and themes, or what are those gaps, and the tools that you're doing to do this analysis, that all kind of comes with experience, and really where the deep thinking is in creating a sponsor analysis. Sometimes a sponsor analysis is more informational, but that information, if it's not transparent to your stakeholder, is still exceptionally useful. But it's finding ways, again, in your analysis to point out those important factors where there are overlaps in terms of sponsor interest with strengths of faculty, and how do you represent it in a way, because we're going to talk about kind of that transformation process and how do you represent it for maximum impact. So again, that transformation is, what can they do with it, right? So we're going to show some examples of products that we've done here. How is it useful, and how is it useful to the audience that you're giving it? So again, you want to tell a compelling story so that they read and react and implement and have it be useful for them. And like I said, we'll have examples, and then now we're going to talk a little bit about knowing your audience, because particularly with a sponsor analysis, there are differences between faculty and leadership. So this may be a general question of who do you generally produce products for? Is it who at your university? Is it leadership? Is it within academic unit leadership, research leadership, or directly for faculty? Or other, as the case may be.
So feel free to pop your responses in the chat.
A lot of leadership. All of the above. Yeah, oh, government, okay. And business, that's interesting. VPR, okay. Yeah, mostly faculty. So yeah, I think as Keith's going to talk about, the audience makes a difference in how you how you phrase things, how you aim things, what you put in leadership of colleges.
All right, so let's dive into audience.
Yeah, so I'm noticing that people are saying mostly leadership in the chat. We do analyses for leadership as well. We're going to talk about the sponsor analyses that we actually put together for faculty first. And when we do these, it's usually because a faculty member or maybe the head of a department or something like that is asking about how they can align their research to what a sponsor is looking for. So we really think about these analyses as being quite tactical in nature. They're relatively immediate, like for example, the faculty member wants to know, is this a good fit or not, right? So the goals underlying these types of analyses is really to show the faculty what the sponsor is looking for, emphasize to them in particular that the research has to align with those sponsor objectives. So as we've already mentioned earlier, sometimes those new faculty might not have a good idea about what the sponsor is looking for. They might be sending out proposals sort of willy-nilly and wasting their own time as well as administrators' time. And one of the things we're really striving for with these types of products is to help faculty go from looking at the FOAs that might be landing in their mailboxes to actually developing an understanding of sponsors. So we don't want them to just apply for anything that sounds vaguely relevant. We want them to actually be thinking about, oh, I should be monitoring what a given sponsor is doing because I understand my research is a good fit there. As a result, the structure of these analyses are quite informational, and they're often relatively quick to put together and relatively brief, right? We're really just going and looking to see what a particular sponsor or particular part of a sponsor is interested in. So we're not necessarily doing a sponsor analysis of all of NSF. We're much more likely to be talking to a faculty member to begin to get an idea of what particular directorate would be relevant for them, for example. And often what we put into these analyses will include past awards to faculty members here at ASU. And we do that because we find that it's useful for the faculty members here to gain an understanding of who else here has been really successful with a sponsor in the past. And then that gives them an idea about who they should be talking to and helps them build out their networks. All right, and now Keith is going to present a few examples of these.
Yeah, so a few years ago, we did a series of one sheets. So just one sheet front and back on really providing a broad overview of NSF directorates, NIH institutes and centers, and a handful of other federal agencies to really just kind of encapsulate what the goals were, because as Catherine said, we find particularly with newer faculty, they are responding to an FOA. They are may be in a little overwhelmed by being thrown into the finding grant funding, that they are look for money first rather than understanding where the best place to look for money is. So what these one sheets did was provide broad overviews of specific divisions and directorates to really get an idea of, is this the right place, and what are the options available. So this lays out broad strategy, and then on the back side of this document, we actually listed what were the programmatic elements, because that is, while it's not time consuming to go, NSF is highly transparent. It's easy to go to their page and understand what their programmatic offerings are. To be able to put something like this in front of faculty to say, okay, these are the programs I'm interested in. These are the ones that fit that I want to explore more, was very useful. So again, this is more informational. It's not necessarily deeply analytical, but it is something that matches the needs of a particular stakeholder. So these were not written for a particular faculty, but it was funneled through a level of leadership to give to faculty so that they had some more background in how to think about sponsors and where was the best place to target their time when they were applying for funding. So that was the NSF example, and we did this, like I said, the same for NIH institutes, of just laying out what the broad areas were, links to key information. Don't expect faculty or a lot of people to want to look at federal budget requests because there's a lot of information, but that is easily linked if they want to make a deeper dive. And again, what are the kind of programmatic elements and what does the funding look like, to see how any individual topic may fit into the overall institute's research funding history.
Thanks, Keith. So now we're going to come back to leadership, which a lot of you have already highlighted as sort of where you're targeting your work for. When we make sponsor analyses for leadership, we're really mapping on sponsor needs to institutional capacity, right? And so we think about this work as being very strategic in nature. we're really trying to look forward into the future and understand where the institution should go. So we're really highlighting those strategic directions that we think our leadership need to know. And again, encouraging them to be thinking out into the future, right? So not being, not just worrying about right now, but to be actually planning. And as a result, the structure of these is that they are much deeper and forward-looking than the analyses that we put together for faculty. And so they take a lot more time and energy. And part of that is because these data aren't just obviously available necessarily. So there's a much stronger reliance on human intelligence and actually talking to folks for these type of analyses. So we're talking to people, for example, here at ASU who might be relevant, or folks actually at these sponsors to try to understand what might be coming. And we also strive to put really clear recommendations into these products in particular. It's not that we don't do this for our other products, but as I'm sure many of you have experienced, we understand that leadership are really busy. They're not necessarily going to read over a 5-page memo to get to conclusions at the end. So we really strive to make the key findings as explicit as possible for them right up front, very clear, so that they can act upon it, or at least they can understand how we came to those conclusions. And now Keith's going to walk through some examples of these.
Yeah, so I'm going to show, these are 2 examples of products that we did a few years ago. We do have the good fortune of working closely with a graphic designer for our big products and projects, being able to put them in a form that obviously makes them more appealing to the reader. So both of the projects I'm highlighting did take a number of months. And so it may not, again, depending on what role you have at your university, how big your CI function is, or what your actual function is, something like this may not be something that you can immediately do. But the concepts here are around providing big recommendations, big picture recommendations for leadership to act upon and give them a good overview of what's happening at a sponsor. So this one was for national defense, where we identified 9 technology priority areas, and how does that graph to our expertise and capabilities here at ASU. And there you see on page 2 what our recommendations were. So hit them with the recommendations up front, and structuring the document around giving them what they need to know first, not doing, say, a standard academic approach of introducing the topic. Here's all of the work that we did and the conclusions on the last page. We found that leadership are either invested enough in a topic to understand the first page, or they're going to read the first page, and everything after that, there needs to be a reason to go deeper into a document to do that. So let's put the recommendations up front. And again, this was one where we had a little more time and flexibility to make it more visually appealing. And this, because of that document, we led into space funding with a focus on NASA. ASU is very strong in space sciences, and how do we retain that level? What does the next handful of years look like to remain competitive in that space? So this one had a little more backup, so the recommendations aren't quite on page 2, but again, it's that layout and having a clear space where they can understand what we see as the needs, and giving the leadership an outline for a path forward, not just like, oh, you need to do this thing, but to give them steps on how to tactically implement some of those key findings, so that it's not just do this thing that's unattainable. Where Catherine mentioned the time, there's a lot of different directions. Research leadership, we found, is a little easier to provide this documentation to. Once we get into the academic units, it's more challenging because their focus isn't exclusively on research. So then that becomes another part of knowing your audience, how much of their focus is on the research enterprise. Because if that's what you're reported about, if they're 20% on research, you expect 20% of their time on the product, and that needs to be taken into account in how you develop products to reach your audience effectively. So because of those, we got Santharama Panchanathan, who is our VP now head of NSF, was our executive VP for the Knowledge Enterprise. President Crow sent a nice note to him about the analysis and just the feedback. And again, we are in a position where we are fuller staffed on the CI function that allows us to do perhaps more robust products. As we kind of close, I think the main takeaway, particularly if you're new to the idea of CI, is really that idea of actionable intelligence. How am I producing? And you can do this, I think, in a lot of different products that you do. How do I provide recommendations that the end user can utilize, implement, or improve their process? And that's, I think, a big takeaway. And I think the main goal of our work is how do we do that informed decision making and inform and improve process and better allocation of resources and things like that. And those are kind of the ideas that underpin our work. So I think some of that I may have covered here. You know, that number one step of actionable recommendations and distilling your message, that importance of human intelligence and getting that perspective of different sources and different insights into whether it's an organization and the sponsor analysis in particular, or research field and what funding may look like in a particular research area. As we kind of showed from those products for to leadership, the visuals matter and how the documents look, and is it easily viewable? Is it easy to find your key points? If you have a important recommendation, to bury it in the middle of a long paragraph, bold it, or it just some elements. Find a way to make your key recommendations visible and accessible. And then, of course, that expectations. We are dealing with a lot of data. Some organizations are transparent, some are not, and in managing those expectations, you actually do get to better products because you're honest again with the end user, your stakeholders, on what you can produce and what information is available, and getting to those elements that are critical. I mentioned this before. It's not just about what they ask for; it's about what they need, and taking that approach to the work. And with that, we can open it up for discussion. We have some core questions there, which we can use as jumping off points. Or if you have any other questions about any topics we discussed, or even if you just like to share your own experience at your university. And I believe you all have the ability to unmute if you would like. I don't think we clicked that box of.
Can I be first?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this presentation. Great, as always. Two problems now. It's something that I think we all face, or I face, at least here at OSU, is how do you measure return on investment on this analysis, or the impact of these analysis? Because I feel like I do an analysis, and then I send to the black hole of administration or whatever, and never comes back that return to me, so I can measure impact, or even adjust the analysis to increase the impact. So how you guys deal with that, since you do a lot of this type of sponsor analysis?
Well, I think we do look at repeat customers. Obviously, higher ups within Knowledge Enterprise, our overall research unit here at ASU. Those are obviously going to be repeat customers. outside of the entity, it's who is coming back because they see value in what we're producing. So that is one element that we track, is whether it's a sponsor analysis or some other project, do we get that re-engagement? But yeah, it is a challenge, and I think sometimes providing value, because it's at the front end. A lot of the work, most of the work we do is pre-solicitation. It can be challenging to show quantitatively our impact. I think there are qualitative ways to do that, and I said before, we do strive to be quantitative. But those number of requests that we get, and tracking the product types, right? So that's one element that we do in our metrics, is what's being requested the most, so that we can see what is the need. And if we see that we're getting a lot more funding analyses requests than capacity analyses or whatnot, that indicates to us what the goals of the organization are, right? So we actually do get a lot of capacity analyses requests, because a lot of that has to do with the size and scope of the university, and the tools that we do have to find that expertise are good, but they're not exhaustive. So that's where us doing the work to kind of put those together has value, because it's just a challenge to find everybody, as Catherine said, like water, or I think I mentioned multidimensional medicine before. Those are not topics where you just like kind of punch it in and you get a clean list. But yeah, showing value is definitely a challenge on a quantitative side.
Thank you.
Anybody else share experiences or any questions about the process, or even how you think you can implement it? If you're a first timer, we threw out first time attending one of these working group meetings. Anything you want to share on the approach or mindset, or how you can perhaps see a way to implement it into your work?
We've got a question in the chat from Sabrina Wu. She says, you've mentioned human intelligence a few times during this presentation. What types of experts are you usually reaching out to, internal or external? What kind of roles do they have within your institution?
I think our most common source is generally faculty. So I would say our most common use of human intelligence is faculty who have experience with the program, or experience with the sponsor. We do. I think one of the other areas of human intelligence that we promote, although we don't always engage in it, is really pushing faculty to engage with program managers. So that becomes part of the process. If we have a presentation of like how faculty can do CI, and obviously this is not their core function, but the value of them talking to colleagues and talking to program managers to get insights into the programs that they're interested in. From our perspective, it really is about kind of building a network, and outreach through NORDUP is helpful in finding people at other universities who have experience. So that's, I think, where the I don't want to say administrative, but the non-faculty, the support side, can share information. We found that faculty who have won the big award are very happy to talk about how they got the award, because they're not necessarily competitive anymore. They have it. So we've had good fortune in that respect of sometimes getting faculty from outside of ASU to participate that way, by leveraging networks on the administrative side through, again, NORDUP, which is what's a National Organization for Research Development Professionals, if you're not familiar with that organization. But yeah, I would say if we did a pie chart of who they are, I would say more than half is generally faculty.
Yeah, I think we've,
And I think that internal, external, I think depends on the nature of the request. Obviously, it's easier to get home institution faculty to talk, and those networks to external faculty do require a bit of a network. Cold calling can be, like, as any cold calling is a challenge.
we very occasionally contacted people in, say, like corporate side or other organizations, but as Keith said, it's primarily academic. And I just say, you know, as we talked about earlier, we practice ethical gathering of information. So, you know, just straight up say why we're doing this and what we're looking for, and don't beat around the bush. Yeah.
We have a few more minutes left if there's another question or two.
I'll ask a question if nobody has any other questions. So I'll give a few seconds here.
I'm still going to advance our last. It's just a reminder that the next working group meeting is November 16th. Karen introduced this at the beginning. If you joined late or did not see it, there's a topic about really how to develop the CI function at your university if you do not have one. And so that will be a panel discussion from folks from UCLA, Oklahoma, and Emory. Okay, Alba, your next question.
I guess there's 2 more questions in the chat, so
Okay.
we'll just
Okay, sorry, I missed those.
pass.
On the gathering side, if you need to digest and take large amounts of structured information, we've been using Octoparse. That's not a tool I'm familiar with. I will look into it. Like I said, a lot of the data work I do is structured around awards and award history and the databases from different sponsors, and or even our internal data, and finding ways to glean insights from that. And then I'll look into Octoparse, and then resources to learn about this. Karen, do you want to talk about that one some more?
I mean, there's always SCIP. If you're unfamiliar with SCIP, it's the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Group. So that has a decidedly industry bent to it, but all of us on the team, well, Catherine will be going next month to the foundational training, but we've all done training with SCIP, and the main thing there is they provide a lot of different types of training and webinars on CI topics, which, you know, is how we've incorporated a lot of stuff from SCIP as well as other resources. But SCIP is probably the best group out there right now as far as learning resources for CI, I think. And you can just go to scip.com and find them. I think it's a com. I don't think it's an org, but it's a great resource for all sorts of things in competitive intelligence. So that's where I would go. Let's see, do we have any other comments? Airtable, I have minimal experience with Airtable. We did deal with some data a while back in Airtable. It's interesting.
Well, then I'll go ahead and ask my question. It's not a question, maybe it's not a question, but I actually added something to the chat here. It seems like, in my point of view, every analysis that you do, looking at sponsors or where to apply or not apply, first of all, you have to know yourself. You have to know your institution, because if you don't have that, the minimum is the capacity. Understand your own capacity, because then you will understand also who are your competitors. Because I don't buy into that logic of having a set of peers that you compete against. If you're dealing with topics, your competitors change because you know, not all the peers have all the topics that you will be competing against. So how do you keep track of your capacity? Let's say you do an analysis for DoD and you say we should increase you know, our activity in DoD, but I'm sorry, my dog is barking. But how do you know you have the capacity to increase or to apply more?
Well, I think part of that process is showing the opportunity to leadership. So, you know, we don't have the ability to allocate resources, and you know, this gets into, again, that switch from analysis to advocacy, or you know, it's you're not necessarily advocating, but you're pointing out and providing that backup for there's gobs and gobs of more money in AI, in artificial intelligence, and how is your university ready to compete for that? You know, and so it's kind of in that sense, it's about identifying opportunities and again, providing some options for what, in this case, leadership could do. If it's something for faculty, you know, it's about the onus is on them on whether they can be competitive for that. But it is, you know, doing a lot of our work is about getting away from what we need to do in the next 3 months and thinking about it in terms of what we need to do in the next 2 years or perhaps even longer, so that we are not responsive to a solicitation that was just released, but know that a solicitation is coming in March, and how do we prepare for that? We know there's a cycle that's you know, biannual, so it's coming in a year and a half. What do we need to do to prepare for that? And that's not all up to us, but that's kind of like the mindset of the work we do. How can we be more forward looking? And we're now over time. If I guess we didn't pop up anything on how to contact us if you had any questions. But thank you everyone for joining. Catherine, Karen, any other parting words?
You can always reach out on the listserv, or, you know, reach out to us at ASU. I think everybody probably has my email, karen.walker@asu.edu, and Keith and Catherine are equally easy to find. So thanks so much, everyone, for participating. It was a great first session, and look forward to seeing everybody again in November. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.